Legal obligations. The Child Protection Act is there to help the coach to identify children at risk and to help them to take action towards this. There are 5 types of abuse: verbal, physical, sexual, emotional and neglect. For example, in hockey, a coach may notice that a participant has bruises up their arm. They would then have to report this to the safety officer at their club. Duty of care is trying to make sure everyone is safe. They have to perform CRC checks, which is criminal record checks, and DBS checks, which is disclosure and bearing service. This is a requirement of the club, as they will get sued if it's not completed. The coach must know about any medical conditions that players may have before training or matches. They must have the contact details of parents or guardians and must take attendance at the beginning and end of the training sessions. The coaches have to be first aid trained and know how to deal with certain scenarios, such as an asthma attack. In any sport, you must have the appropriate ratio of coach to participants. For example, in kayaking, it's a ratio of 1:6, as it's a very dangerous sport. Code of conduct acts as a rulebook, as it influences coaches or participants of what to do in a scenario. When transporting people, coaches cannot use their own personal vehicles. If they are transporting younger athletes, coaches should get parental permission. Coaches must have their driving licence and must enforce stuff such as seatbelts. There are 3 types of insurance: public liability insurance, employer's liability insurance, and business equipment insurance. PLI is when you're covered if a member of the public sues you. In a sport such as skiing, the PLI has to be high, as there is a chance in skiing someone you're teaching may lose control, which could result in them injuring themselves, which is very likely in skiing as it's deemed a high-risk sport. Another sport where PLI would have to be high is rock climbing, as it's a very dangerous sport, which means there is a high chance of injury. However, a sport which would have low PLI would be swimming, as it's not seen as a high-risk sport, and it's in a safe location, as there are lifeguards. It is the coach's responsibility to make sure they have these lifeguards, otherwise the insurance could go invalid. Employer's liability insurance means you're insured if an employer is injured. In football, the ELI would need to be high, as the players are likely to get injured during a match or training. The ELI wouldn't need to be as high in a sport such as bowls, as there is not a risk whilst playing. Business equipment insurance is covered for damage or loss of equipment. For a sport such as Formula 1 racing, the BEI would need to be high, as the cars cost over £1 million each, and you will need a lot of spare parts in case there's an accident during the race. Therefore, the BEI would need to be high. Whereas in a sport such as netball, the BEI would be a lot lower, as equipment such as netballs, bibs, cones and goals aren't very expensive, and therefore doesn't require as much BEI as a Formula 1 driver. Equal opportunities. A coach should make sure there's equal opportunities for any age, gender, religion or physical size. There is a lot of stereotyping in sport. For example, boys shouldn't dance or girls shouldn't play rugby. So it's important for coaches to show inclusivity in their training sessions. Most of these stereotypes comes from the media, which everyone has access to. Therefore, it has a lot of influence over people. The media has control of what we view. For example, in the news, it has a lot of male-dominant sports in it, such as football, rugby, cricket and tennis, and not very many female sports. The other way people hear about these stereotypes would be from society and history, which has a high impact on people. A lot of coaches in sport are male, which means that young girls don't really have many female role models to look up to. If there were more female coaches in male-dominant sports and more male coaches in female-dominant sports, then people would realise that anyone can participate in any sport no matter their gender. Coaches have to be aware that athletes in their team will have different abilities. So to make it fair and to make sure people don't feel left out, coaches should ensure that in a training match there's a mixture of abilities in each team. Sometime in team sports, such as rugby, you get quiet people that don't really speak up, and you get others who are really loud, so a coach should make sure that they listen to all their players' views. Health and safety is a lot to do with adapting to the scenarios that may happen around you, as you're not going to know when a player is going to get injured. However, you can help to prevent an injury from taking place. This is especially important in sports such as trampolining or gymnastics, because if the coach doesn't teach the technique correctly, then the participants may get seriously injured. For example, in trampolining, the coach must teach everyone the progressions before allowing them to do a flip. Javelin requires a lot of space as it's highly dangerous, therefore the coach has to be aware of the space they're going to be working in. This means thinking about the size of the field, whether or not people use the field, and if the participants are in a safe area before starting to throw the javelins. During a football match, if the weather gets too hot, a coach must ensure that everyone has water, as they could get dehydrated or might get heat stroke if they get too hot. Coaches must perform a warm-up and make sure the athletes have stretched, and must make sure they perform a cool-down to prevent injuries. Before a hockey training session, coaches need to be aware of any injuries that the participants have or any medical conditions. Before a rugby match, the coach should make sure they have checked to see if anything's on the pitch and to see if the game can continue, as previous weather may have made it unsafe to play on. If you play a sport such as tennis, then the weather will affect the training sessions and matches, as the court can become very slippery when wet and is therefore unsafe to play on, so the coach will have to either cancel the session or adapt to the new environment. To help adapt the session, the coach can check the weather forecast so they can plan the new session in advance. The coach must always carry a first aid kit with them and has to fill out a risk assessment, which is an active document as it has to be kept up to date. In hockey, the coach has to make sure the players remove any jewellery, for example earrings or bracelet, as this could injure them or an opponent.